brokered the deal between Israel and Lebanon. We will go into that. But if I may, I think this whole room is very interested in the issue of the hostage deal and the reports this morning coming out like it might be quite imminent. What can you tell us about that? Is it close?
Well, first, Yonit, thank you for doing this and coming here. And thank you for everyone for having us join this conference. Look, I think I don't want to get ahead of the process. We have Brett McGurk, our chief negotiator, is there, and I think over the last year and a half, it's been hard to say unique or different because every day has been different. But it's really unprecedented to have the outgoing president's chief negotiator in Doha together with the incoming administration's chief negotiator. And President Biden really wanted to do everything we can to, not only for a seamless transition, but really on this issue to be able to present as good a team as possible between the two presidents that would make progress. And so the two of them are there. We're all very hopeful. We've made a lot of progress in those negotiations. But I think that I don't want to get ahead of this process because there's a certain element of Groundhog Day where we've been here before. And so I want to make sure that I don't want to get ahead of that. But they've been working I think Brett's been there for the last 9 days straight. Steve arrived on Saturday. And so I'm very hopeful that we can close this out as soon as possible.
Well, you're an American diplomat, I'm an Israeli journalist, so let me just push back on that a little bit and ask, is it a tangible possibility that Israeli hostages would be released before January 20th, you think? And Americans and others, you're right. Sorry about that.
They can't hear you.
Can't hear me? I'll speak louder? I get that a lot in Israel too. I apologize. I will ask this again. And just to try and see if there is a chance that hostages will be released before January 20th.
That is our goal, and we will not stop until we can achieve that. The president has said this publicly. I can tell you what he says privately as well. Because some folks bring politics into this and say, leave this for the next team. They raise all kinds of images from the past. It's not good for you politically. And he has said, this is not about politics. This is about getting the hostages out. And I can tell you, the president spoke to Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday. Brett's been on the phone with the president, with Jake, with others every day. We are going to not leave any stone. We recognize that our days are numbered in the administration to next Monday, but every day that goes by for the hostages is a whole year, is a world. And so whatever we can do, it doesn't matter what it takes. Whatever we can do at this moment to put that pressure to get the deal done, we're going to do. I am very hopeful that we will see the first hostages. And again, this won't be a mass. It will be, if the deal happens, it will be piece by piece. It will be a phased approach, but that we will see the very first hostages come home as soon as possible.
Yeah, I meant to that. I want to move on to ask about the deal that you were the architect of, the deal between Israel, the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon. How does that look now when we are right at that moment where the first phase is supposed to end? That's at the end of January. Do you think the ceasefire will hold?
When you do it, it's a weird ceasefire because it's a ceasefire between the two states of Lebanon and Israel, but Lebanon never entered the war. It was Hezbollah that opened the war or entered the war, and the Lebanese army not only did not join the war, but stayed out of it, and if anything was disruptive to Hezbollah. So the first test for me was, will it last 24 hours? I wasn't 100% sure. The next was 7 days. Once we got to 7 days, I thought we had a runway. And look, what's happened on the ground is this. The ceasefire doesn't have a limitation to it. It does not have an end date. What we did was we created a situation where on day one of the ceasefire, all firing stops. But Israel remained on the ground, which is not what happened in 2006, where Israel had to withdraw immediately. So Israel stays frozen on the ground, everybody stops shooting, and then as Israel withdraws, as the Lebanese army deploys. And so you have to have a capability to withdraw. As Hezbollah moves to the north, the LAF, Lebanese Armed Forces, move to the south, and then the IDF leaves. That's a very complicated process. We've set up mechanisms that didn't exist before, something called very creatively the mechanism. And it's chaired.
Where did you come up with that?
That was the hardest part of the negotiation. But it's chaired by the United States, and it meets every couple of weeks at the technical level, which is we now have a 2-star U.S. general on the ground in Lebanon with a team that chairs that meeting. I co-chair the mechanism with him, but he runs the meetings every 2 weeks. That means that in South Lebanon, an Israeli general with his team crossed into Lebanon and sit in a room with a U.S. general that hosts it, Lebanese generals, and Israeli generals sitting in the same room. This is unprecedented. So I'm very hopeful that it holds. We'll have to see. I think Israel has to take it very seriously, and that takes some compromising on their side to live within deadlines, and if not, to do whatever it can not to give an excuse for the other side. And the other side has to deploy as quickly as possible. So there's a lot of work that has to be done. I was there a few days ago, and I'm hopeful that the next team will address it as they come into power.
Can you elaborate on the commitment that the U.S. gave Israel vis-a-vis its ability to respond if there's Hezbollah aggression? If, for instance, they see Hezbollah digging a tunnel again, how can they respond?
The agreement is very clear. It is not a vague agreement. And the president was even more clear in the Rose Garden when he announced it. If somebody violates it, if Hezbollah violates it, then the mechanism is there to address it. And if there are immediate threats to Israel's security, Israel has every right of self-defense as defined by international law. If they dig a tunnel, I don't think they'll get to the point of digging the tunnel. But the point is for them to move north. And from everything we are seeing, Hezbollah is actually moving to the north. They understand that this is not going to be the same as it was in the past. And we're seeing changes in behavior. Look, Lebanon is changing. We've had a 2-year political vacuum. The war has made it worse. And we just saw a president elected in Lebanon for the first time in 2.25 years. This is the former commander-in-chief of the Lebanese army, someone that we have worked very closely with in the United States. We feel very confident and trust in him. We have trust in him. So these are good developments. But it's the Middle East, it's Lebanon, it's Israel. I'm always on my toes.
As you should be. I mean, we are at the end of the Biden administration, leaving office in a week. Let's talk about the Middle East that he is leaving. So on the one hand, you have Iran that is weaker, the Shia axis is weaker, unprecedented change in Syria, Houthis being quite brazen, Israel probably being, or not probably, stronger than it was a year and 3 months ago. How do you assess all this?
Let's look at this from what was the reality on October 6th, what was the reality on October 8th, and where we are today. On October 6th, Israel was mired in internal political strife. It was seen in the region as relatively weak. Iran was on the ascendance. It was the country with the strongest presence across the Middle East, from Iraq all the way to the Mediterranean. The Russians were heavily ensconced in the region. The U.S. was seen as, are we fully committed to staying? Are we not? Are we redeploying out? Do we have enough of a commitment? Are we more focused in Asia than we were in the Middle East? October 7th clearly showed beyond the horrors of October 7, it also presented Israel as even weaker than people thought, or rather proved that Israel was as weak as the region thought on October 6. I'm not making this pretty, but that's what it was. And we, the United States, at that point decided that we were going to support Israel's ability to respond in as strong way as possible. And you fast forward, and Israel is the strongest military in the Middle East, by far. Iran is the weakest that it's been since the fall of Saddam Hussein. Hezbollah is weaker, significantly weaker. It is not gone, but it is significantly weaker. And the Shia militias in Iraq, what we refer to as the SMGs, are deterred in the sense that they are much more focused on Iraq right now and refused Iran's insistence on them joining the fight on behalf of Assad in Aleppo, and said, we're good. And really now we have the Houthis, in which we can get to in a second. Mm-hmm. And lastly, there is no one in the Middle East who believes that the United States is leaving, is not in the Middle East, is not deterred by the US presence. The idea that we had at one point 2 aircraft carriers and destroyers and submarines across the Middle East, in the Mediterranean, but in the Red Sea. The first Iran attack, which was an unbelievable attack from a sovereign country, for the first time, from sovereign Iran into Israel in April 14, was shot down by a coalition led by the United States, together with Israel and other countries. Mm-hmm. And I think the United States was able to shoot down nearly 50% of those missiles. So the idea that today there's a THAAD, US THAAD system in Israel. The collaboration between Israel and the United States militarily is strong, but so is the collaboration between the United States military and Gulf countries and other Arab countries. So today you look at where we are, the Middle East that we still have the Houthis as a unfinished business. They're very difficult, they have a lot less to lose, and they're very creative, and they should not be discounted at all. They are very good at what they do. And we have to be we have to address them seriously. But beyond that, it is a remarkable transformation. If we get the hostage deal in the next few days, it opens the door to something that we were very close to getting on the eve of October 7 that may have also enabled October 7 or incentivized the timing of it, which was a normalization deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And so that's what's on the table with this deal now, and what could be the future for the Middle East.
Yeah, that's the optimist version, but it definitely is an option. If we...
Israel meets America.
I mean, occasionally the region does give you good surprises. That happens every once in a while. But I do want to ask, and we'll get to the Houthis in a minute, about Iran. And there are people in Israel, in the top brass of the security echelon, saying, now is the time, because Iran is weak, because of what you said, to attack the nuclear sites. There are others that are saying, no, a deal is actually the right thing to do. We don't know where the new administration is going. But if they were asking you, and I assume that in back channels they might be, what would you say? What do you think the right thing to do is?
Look, I think you took one player out of the equation, which is Iran. There was a lot of talk when President Biden came into office. The talking heads were convinced that we are a couple of months away from getting back into the JCPOA, into the original agreement with Iran that President Obama negotiated, that President Trump exited. And despite the fact that President Biden thought it was a mistake to get out of the agreement, he did not rush into the agreement. And the reason I bring this up is because what Iran comes to the table with will determine how you answer that question. going after the nuclear sites on an unprovoked attack without them crossing the thresholds on their nuclear capability that the international community has put forth would have significant consequences potentially, and something that they would have to consider, Israel would have to consider, and so would the United States. And it may not mean only attacks against Israel. This is where it may mean engulfing the region in a wider attacks. We have a lot of troops across the region. We have a lot of our people there. And so I think that the question will be, what is a deal? Some deals I think are worth doing. Some deals I think are not worth doing. And I think that what Iran was willing to come to the table with was not enough for President Biden to say yes to. There were people in our administration who thought it was advisable and advised the president to do it, and he listened to that advice and rejected it and decided that it was not a good enough deal. So the question is, I think what the incoming team is going to do is going to say, look, Iran is very weak. My sense is they will come to the table with to the Iranians saying, you don't have as much leverage as you once did. Here's what we would expect you to put on the table, and here's how we would react to it.
As someone who has been woken up like the rest of the Israelis living in central Israel for the past couple of weeks at 4 a.m. due to Houthi missiles being launched from Yemen, a development none of us could imagine 2 years ago, what should be done? And there are a lot of people who say whatever the attacks against the Houthis should have happened earlier, that kind of massive attacks on them.
I think it was on your podcast where someone said that. I'm
glad you listen.
I think everybody should listen to it. Look, I think the Houthis present a challenge. One, they were seen for a long time as a pure Iran proxy. Mm-hmm. And therefore, the thought was, if you deal with Iran, you're dealing with the Houthis. And that was across the board on intelligence, whether it was Israeli or American, bipartisan. The change that I see is the Houthis are not as, they're not under the same control of Iran. I think this is a little bit of the golem starting to seek independence. And it is as we saw Saudi Arabia and UAE fought a very expensive, bloody, lengthy, multi-year war against the Houthis in Yemen, and that did not yield the results. So you go into a wider war with the Yemenis, and I think of President Clinton's former campaign manager once said, never get into the fight in the mud with the pig, because you both get dirty and he likes it. And I worry that is the case here with the Houthis. They would love nothing more than an all-out war between Israel and the Houthis. And so I think you have to, I do believe that one, you have to target them much more directly and seriously. And number two, you have to be really strategic and careful that you're advancing your own objectives and not theirs. And so I think that's a complicated piece. And look, I think we tend to look at the Trump team coming in as a monolithic. I think they have very strong disagreements and two different wings, one that wants to be more interventionist and one that wants zero intervention and nothing but deals. And I think that's true in the Middle East, it's true in China, it's true philosophically. And so I think they'll have to manage that issue as well, even when it comes to, especially with Iran and even with the Houthis.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much to ask you, but we do need to wind up our conversation. I'm not going to let you off the hook without describing to everyone here, I'm sure you saw this, a moment in which senior advisor to the president, Amos Hochstein, walks into a Starbucks in Beirut and is surrounded by people who want to pay his tab. Also, we should say your name was presented. You mentioned the new president in Lebanon. As a protest vote, someone did present, Hezbollah, I think, presented your name for president in Lebanon. I'm going to have to ask the only room in the world that can do this. How does a nice Jewish boy like you get to this situation? I mean, could you have imagined that this would be where your career trajectory led you?
And when I was in high school, all I wanted to do was run for office in Lebanon. So now that I finally got a vote,
see, dreams do come true.
Look, so it's a hard question to answer. The Starbucks scene was I was there to support Starbucks because Starbucks around the region was getting in certain countries a lot of boycotts. So I tried to stop in American businesses.
I would never mention this unless it become viral, right? I mean, all over.
It was a remarkable reaction to that. Look, I think what it shows at the end of the day, first of all, I think that this audience, Israelis, should know if there was ever a peace between Israel and Lebanon, I've thought this for 30 years. The only country that I think would actually have a warm peace would be those two countries. I go to Beirut and I feel like I'm in Tel Aviv. And the atmosphere on the street, the way people behave, just the feel is very Tel Aviv. And I really believe that Lebanon is a country that got hijacked in 1970, and for the last, 55 years, they have been controlled by a foreign force of one or another. First the Syrians, then the Israelis, then the Syrians, then the Iranians. They've never been independent. You travel around the world, wherever you go, especially in middle-income countries, and half the economy is controlled by Lebanese. You go to UAE, all the funds are owned by Emiratis and controlled and managed by Lebanese. In the United States, one of the most successful immigrant communities historically, a wealthy, well-respected community. Except they all have to leave Lebanon to do it, is the tragedy. And in the 1950s, when Jews were being kicked out of every country in the Middle East, in the Arab world, and horrifically treated, there were over 50,000 Jews living in Lebanon peacefully in the 1970s. And they didn't leave because they were kicked out. They left because the Civil War broke out. And they left for Canada and France and Switzerland. There's a synagogue that was rebuilt in downtown Beirut in 2014 with a big sign with Hebrew letters, Magen Avraham, with no security and people coming and going. So I think it's a truly pluralist, religiously pluralist country because of the structure of Sunnis, Shias, different kinds of Christian, Druze. And so I've been fascinated by the country. I've been going there for 30 years, and I think the relationships are there. And I think that it's good for Israel, it's good for Lebanon, it's good for the United States, it's good for the region, for Lebanon to go back to prosperity. And whenever they've been in prosperity, they've been peaceful. And therefore, it's Hezbollah and Iran that tried to bring down the economy, introduce the corruption, and have Hezbollah as the only where everybody's dependent on them. So the destruction of the leadership of Hezbollah is the opportunity. President On is the right person to, I think, lead the country, but we'll have to see how that goes. But it is important for Israel to also understand that and to give it space to be able to be developed and to come out from, we talk about the damage in Israel from the war. The damage in Lebanon is not inconsequential. It is quite significant. So we have to not allow what Iran does well across the region from 1992 onwards is identify vacuums and occupy them. So in 2006, after the war, when Israel retreated and there was a ceasefire and there was devastation of all the houses and the farms and the electricity and the water, Iran was the only one that came in and paid money to rebuild some of it and took a lot of credit for it. And so we can't allow that to happen again. We have to learn from these lessons of the past. Both the United States does. Us isolating ourselves away only paves the way for Iran to be more integrated. So we have to make sure those vacuums don't exist.
Amos Hochstein, I think I speak for this room when I say thank you for everything you do, and thank you for this conversation today.